Hello, welcome to the Arts First podcast, dedicated to freedom of expression and arts for art's sake. I'm Wendy Earle, and I'm talking today with artist Dido Powell. We're discussing the exhibition that recently opened at the National Gallery, focusing on the iconic painting, The Haywain, by Constable, painted in 1821. The National Gallery has curated this exhibition as part of its 200th anniversary celebrations. And when the exhibition was announced, it generated flack because the publicity highlighted the socio-economic background of the painting. You may remember that a few years ago, Tate Britain generated a great furore over the exhibition of William Hogarth's work. Many people complained that the labels and information panels were patronising, lecturing, and pointedly political. Personally, we were among the appalled. So we went along to the Constable exhibition when it opened to see whether it had fallen into the same trap. I think we were quite surprised though, weren't we, Dido?
Yes, I thought that they gave important historical information, and I didn't feel that it was patronising, that they mentioned facts that were useful to know. They cited the Corn Laws and Settlement Act and Trespass Act to just point out what the position of workers was at the time, but it was done quite subtly.
Yes, I think it was. It certainly didn't have the kind of lecturing labels and panels that seemed to sort of dominate the Hogarth exhibition. But I do think they took a opportunity to have a dig at Constable and about his own personal background, that he was the son of a landowner and that he didn't ever actually work on the land that he painted so lovingly. So I felt there was a little bit of that there, but certainly a lot more subtle than the Hogarth.
Yes, there was that mention. But what I found when I was reading up about Constable is that information given to A-level history of art students, even in that handout, there's quite a section on the position of workers at that time as contextual background for the Haywain. So there always has been a mention of what was going on in agriculture at that time, but it wasn't predominant, and they certainly didn't need to explain that Constable didn't work on the land.
I don't know if it's just me, but sometimes I do feel like it's a tendency to look at works of art from the past, question the motives of the artists at some level. You know, like one of the things that's talked about quite a lot is the idea of nostalgia. Constable seemed to be quite nostalgic about the landscape of where he grew up. And that doesn't seem to be a necessarily bad thing, but nostalgia these days has a kind of connotation of looking to the past.
Well, the nostalgic aspect comes in through his own statements. In a way, he has pointed us in that direction because he mentions in phrases the carefree nature of his childhood. So this painting, based on a view that he knew so well in Suffolk near Flatford, showing the River Stour, it's a working landscape, a Georgic landscape, and this is what he had such strong feelings for. He mentions the interest in looking at barges, locks, his father's mill, fishing, and he particularly, the famous quote that he came out with was, "It was the sound of water escaping from mill dams, willows, old rotten posts, brickwork. I love such things." So these are details that he remembers very powerfully from his childhood, and they are details that you wouldn't find in a pastoral landscape. In fact, he said he didn't want to imitate landscapes done by previous artists. He didn't want a pastoral scene, and yet the way we read this scene is very much as an icon of idyllic English life, and it is seen very much as a pastoral scene. But the specifics of even the Wain itself, this cart that's being dragged across the river, are really detailed, that he emphasised the fact that the cart had got stuck in the river because he knew that in the summer the metal on the wheels would expand and the carts often did get stuck. And the other irony is that all these details that show such in-depth knowledge gathered from personal experience, but also very, very acute observation of nature, the picture was actually put together in his Hampstead studio and was the result of between 15 and 20 years of extensive drawings.
Yeah, and I think it's a fabulous picture to actually look at in the flesh. I mean, it's there in that exhibition, and as you look at it, you pick up more and more detail, don't you? Like the people working right in the fields in the background. There's a guy, I don't know whether he's a fisherman or somebody sort of struggling through the weeds to get to the riverside. There's a woman filling a jug, and there's there's a dog, and all of these details, and they're painted with such care.
Yes, the details serve quite a few different purposes. So people joke about the fact that if you're looking at a landscape and you don't know who it's by, try and look for something red in it, just a dot of red. And in the Haywain, you have a red saddle on the horse. And once you've noticed that red, you see there are other tiny pointers of red. You could call them sort of eye catchers that lead you through the painting, but they're very, very small. And basically, the red complementary contrast of green makes the green glow more. But it also adds a human element and is slightly reminiscent of early Dutch landscapes, where you couldn't have a landscape that absolutely had no human element at all. And there would be maybe a figure, a couple of figures to suggest some sort of activity. So it's very much the working landscape is what he had such strong feelings for. And his attention to the trees and the clouds and the weather fits this. He was very interested in science and in meteorology, and he collected and did many sketches of clouds, and he analysed each cloud. He recorded the time of day, what the general weather was like, and also looked to what other artists had done and did a lot of research into it, looked at Cosn's drawings of clouds and how they worked, and was very influenced by a book written in 1802 by Luc Fildes on clouds. So behind this image is a lot of a very scientific attitude, which is very modern and injects a note of great contemporaneity into this image that is seen as a rural idyll and a nostalgic scene.
Yeah, and it's interesting that one of the paintings, I think near the entrance as you go in, is a big painting by Gainsborough, is it? And the trees, they're very beautifully painted, and there's no disrespect here to Gainsborough, but they are very much perfected forms. So Gainsborough is being kind of an idealised picture of the countryside, whereas what you get the sense with Constable is he wants to kind of get it as it is and get a sense of earthiness and muddiness and greenness to it that sort of like almost is reflected in his brushstroke. So I think you said at the exhibition that tradition in art up until that time was to almost hide the brushstroke, whereas Constable was very much of the direction of artists where their brushstrokes are kind of used to give a sense of movement, perhaps even in the picture. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
In fact, even when Constable was training at the Royal Academy schools, his uncle was paying for him to do some training, and the uncle withdrew because he found his painting too coarse and too rough. And the academic way of painting was to disguise all means of production. And exactly, Constable's very thick paint and his scumbling and his use of a palette knife to smear great patches of light across the surface, and the whole way that he built up the colours in using many different techniques, so very adventurous. So for the transparent areas, he would sometimes do a layer of yellow and then a layer of blue over that, as well as green, to get a sort of a glow coming through the colour, and then have these very smearing, quick streaks of paint on the surface to represent the surface of the water. So he was not popular in his lifetime. Well, when the Haywain was done, it was sent. He had no success with it, showing it in the Royal Academy, but it was sent to France, where artists like Delacroix, who was so obsessed with colour and thinking of expressive ways of using colour, where he was very impressed by it. And in fact, Constable got a gold medal at the Salon. And yes, Wendy, you were saying about Gainsborough's trees. Well, they're like little broccoli patches that are then matched by broccoli-shaped clouds. And there are many landscapes where the clouds and the trees echo each other. But with Constable, he shows the freedom and the changeability of the clouds, and actually said that what he was most fascinated by was the changefulness of nature. So it's not just the working landscape, but it's how the sky is changing the whole time.
I think the way he paints light actually is also amazing. And I think it's one of those things that, artists were very obsessed with, weren't they, in the sort of like late 19th, or from the 19th century. And I was interested because I took photographs of the left-hand side of the painting and the right-hand side of the painting. And on the camera, they almost look like two different parts of the painting. So the right-hand side of the painting, it's very light. Mm-hmm. And the left side of the painting is much more shadowy, because they could almost be two separate paintings, because you've got a dark cloud over the left side of the painting and much lighter clouds over the right side. And it just seems to affect the colour of the scenery below it. I mean, it is remarkable in the way that, he does that.
And then, as you say, the left and the right side, but unlike classical landscapists who definitely balance the left and the right side, the naturalism comes in that then you get suddenly a bright shot of light shining through behind the trees in the dark area. So every single part you see, you're not being convinced that it's an artificial construction. And yet actually he did make a lot of changes to the composition, and he changed the shape of the river to give it a rounder and a slightly more diagonal element to the left-hand side that suggests a pathway. He chose a very high up view. So he does shiftings in order to get a good composition, but it's these unexpected details that could only have come from first-hand observation that give the picture enormous freshness. And in terms of the position of figures within a landscape, the man standing by the Wain, his back is turned to us, whereas if you were doing a picturesque landscape with figures, the figures would be positioned to echo the shapes of plants and trees, and they would also often be twisted towards the viewer. And this view of the back is quite realistic and more radical, because you get that hunch of what is the physical effect of certain types of work. The very thing that, say, some Courbet was interested in when he did the Stonebreakers. What does a back look like when it's had to lug stones around all its life?
I think the exhibition is very good in the way that it gives all of this access to detail. Like, there are some very beautiful cloud paintings, which really show how he looked at the different types of clouds. And they're really exquisite in their own right, even though they're only preparatory drawings. And then there is his little sketchbooks, where his drawings are really exquisite. He was originally self-taught, wasn't he? He started out on his own, and then he got training subsequently.
And
he felt that helped.
Such a breadth of vision, because the pocket-sized sketchbooks are so delicate. So the drawings, many of them are very, very delicate. Some are quite detailed, some are looser, but he seems to be able to adapt the style precisely to the medium he's working in. And Haywain was part of a series of pictures that he called his 6-footers. They were very big, and they were based on drawings, but then there was a large drawing. But with these sketches, so he collected them all, he was very insistent that a sketch could be used once. It was like something drinking from the pond once. You don't go back and have another drink. It has to match your state of mind in that one go, and you can't reuse it. And actually lots of the drawings to me really showed that they really captured a moment very clearly, and it was interesting to see the very delicate and detailed way he drew that was detailed and yet not at all niggly.
You can see why Constable has come to be regarded as one of the great English painters. I would say that painting does stand the test of time in terms of the more you look at it, the more you get out of it. And the more you find out about how it was created, the more you realise the level of skill and depth of thinking, in a way, that goes into it.
Yes, I think that's absolutely it. And the fact that he wanted the scientific element, there's a romantic element, the nostalgic element, and he actually wanted landscape to be considered a branch of natural philosophy. So his intentions are broad, what he achieved was very broad, but also his landscape. I didn't know Suffolk well. I saw Constable Suffolk before I saw real Suffolk a lot. And every change in the weather in Suffolk, I now see the landscape through his eyes. And he, though his work wasn't appreciated so much just as he did it, the Impressionists were incredibly influenced by him, and his skies influenced Barbizon's school in France as well. And that's why they were very, very keen on his work. And it's interesting that an artist who could be so innovatory and so specific in truth to nature, with the idea of you have to know something to paint it, just as Leonardo wanted to know everything before he would paint it. He had this sort of balance between being conservative in some ways, but very innovatory. So he's an important painter to look at now in terms of artists being judged by other criteria other than their approach to their work, and the contemporary thing of reassessing everybody's art in terms of their moral behaviour and their politics.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, just because he was a conservative thinker, that doesn't make him a bad man. And I think his work reflects his deep thinking, and that's what we have to take away from it, rather than any sense of, dismissing him for being a man of his time.
Yes, yeah. And that's absolutely right. And he was very modern in one respect, is he said when he looked at nature, he wanted to make sure he had no picture in his head, and he didn't want to imitate any of the artists of his day, though he was influenced by Dutch landscapes, but he wanted to get away from the classical landscapes of Poussin and Claude. So in that way, he was radical in the way that many of the Impressionists were radical.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks ever so much, Dido. That was great. And I really enjoyed going to the exhibition with you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. And I liked all the other landscapes as well. I liked other landscapes done by some of Constable's contemporaries who were also aiming at similar things. So it's a lovely exhibition because it allows you to really think and really focus because you're not overwhelmed by a vast quantity of work, and therefore you can give deep attention to every piece that's in the exhibition.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Arts First. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please share it with your friends. You can follow us on your own podcast provider, and you can check out other episodes on our Substack, artsfirst.uk, which you can subscribe to keep up to date with all our episodes. And we welcome your feedback. We're on a learning curve. Thanks, bye.